Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome from St. Francis Retreat Center here at Mepkin Abbey to this episode of the Forum for Contemplative Ecology. We're so pleased this evening to be talking about sacred water with Blair Nelsen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sam and let you introduce her, Sam, and begin the evening.
Thanks so much, Father Garrick, and good evening, everybody. It's a joy to be with you today. And we're here some 1 year and a half into our Mebkin Abbey Forum for Contemplative Ecology in honor of the memory and continued spirit of Brother Kyle Berceau, who had the vision for this forum on contemplative ecology and whose memory we celebrate each and every time we gather together. Tonight, we're very fortunate to be joined by a friend and classmate of mine, Blair Nelsen. And there's many things I could say about Blair, and I had the gift of seeing her in person just a few weeks ago and a wonderful lunch by the sea this past summer. But Blair Nelsen is the Executive Director of Waterspirit, which is an ecology and spirituality program which through education, reflection, action, and celebration deepens appreciation of water and its place in the community of life, increases understanding of water issues, and empowers people to participate in the protection and preservation of water. Blair received her Master's of Arts in Religion from Yale Divinity School and her BA with honors in environmental studies from Brown. She brings a multi-faith international perspective to her work after living in Venezuela and Brazil for many years. And I'm excited to hear about her upcoming trip back to Brazil for the big UN climate change meeting. In 2022, Blair co-authored the Climate Pastoral Care Course. She is a Good Grief Network community flow facilitator who has been trained in climate café facilitation by the Climate Psychology Alliance of North America. Additionally, she holds a certificate in climate psychology from the California Institute for Integral Studies. Blair is a frequent writer and speaker about water, climate change, biodiversity, nature, climate anxiety, spirituality, religion, mindfulness, and contemplative practices. And with that, let's give a very warm welcome to Blair, who will lead us in our opening contemplative practice.
Thank you very much for the invitation to join you this evening. I love talking about my work and I love talking about water, so I'm very grateful that we're going to be able to have this time together. But I'm going to start things off with a contemplative exercise that is largely taken from Mary Ann Ray's OP's text called Wondrous Water, with a few add-ons as well. So I invite you to get into a comfortable position. And if you'd like to, feel free to close your eyes and take a few deep breaths while I pull up my text. After taking a few deep breaths, feel where your feet meet the ground. Imagine your spine is the trunk of a tree. Your roots stretch down from your spine, from your feet, down, 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 through the earth into its very, very heart. Then from the top of your trunk, your branches reach up and up and up into the glorious sky. You are made of stardust. Every element in your body was created during the Big Bang, condensed together into your specific body under the exact perfect conditions for your life to exist and to flourish. You are the result of a collection of miracles, perfectly timed and perfectly placed to be alive and aware at this moment. Now become conscious of the saliva in your mouth, the moisture on the palms of your hands, the wetness of your tears. Our bodies are mostly water. Once each of us floated around as embryonic cells in the sea of our mother's womb, our lungs filled with the fluid. Water moves in and out of each one of our cells every moment of every day. The water we drink unites us with the sacred earth as intimately as the air we breathe. The water around us and the water in us are united in a wondrous continual cycle, evaporated from the oceans by the sun, condensing as clouds, and returning through rivers to the sea, passing on the way through countless animals, plants, and our own bodies. The natural cycle processes a regular trickle that is available for human life. It is transferred from ocean to the sky and back to the land. That trickle allowed life on land to evolve and allows human life to survive. Each of us contributes to this trickle about 1 liter a day just through our breath and sweat. The earliest life forms, our most ancient ancestors, developed in the sea. The mineral makeup of our body and the salty taste of our tears are closely related to that of seawater, reminders of our marine evolutionary birth. The sea carries us through an eternal cycle. All in the end returns to the sea. It is the beginning and the end. Take a few more deep breaths. And when you are ready, please open your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair, for that profoundly moving experience of presencing ourselves to the water body in and between and among us, and the sacredness of water that sustains our lives in every moment, which is certainly going to be our theme for our gathering this evening. And so as we begin, Blair, I'd love to hear a little more about your own journey into ecological spirituality, and particularly your own infatuation with water. You know, you don't meet too many people who have dedicated their entire lives and careers to an element like water. And it's just so remarkable to watch your journey unfold. And so we'd love to hear, how did you become so infatuated with water?
Well, the infatuation found me before I even realized it. I was a kid who grew up loving to go swimming, and it just kind of stayed with me. When I was in middle school, I first learned about earth-based spiritualities, especially neo-paganism and Wicca, and something about that just resonated with me immediately. It felt like something that felt like me, a place for this connection with water and with all of earth within a spiritual life was something that, people talk about a moment of ecological conversion, but it felt like stepping into an invisible community that I was already a part of. So it was less a change and more of a welcoming. And that brought me eventually, that sense of reverence for water and for all of nature brought me to eventually getting my degree in environmental studies and doing environmental nonprofit work and doing a lot of lifestyle kind of activism. But only when I accepted this position at Waterspirit in 2019 did I receive that invitation to fully dedicate myself to water in this way, which I've been honored really to get to do, because not only did I have that deep-seated love for my childhood for water, also in water, it's so easy to see instances of moral transgression and ecological sin. We all need water to survive. We all know this. We all know that transgressions against water, transgressions against life itself. It's easy for us to step up and see the importance or even the sacredness of water. And so having work to do with such a clear moral imperative, it feels really fulfilling.
Wonderful. And I'm really just so struck by how in you following your allurement and your sense of love for water and all that it signifies, the doors that have opened. I mean, here you are directing a nonprofit dedicated to water protection. And yeah, I wonder, is there anything, Blair, especially from your experience in South America, like anything you mentioned that, I mean, you lived and studied in Venezuela and Brazil, and I'm curious, like, was there anything that you gleaned from that season of your life that helped to kind of animate your desire to protect, to commit your vocation to protecting water?
When I think of, well, so I spent middle school and high school in Venezuela. And during that time, my family got to take trips down to the Venezuelan cloud forest, an area called Canaima. And that's an area where the highest waterfall in the world is, Angel Falls. And I remember flying over it and also swimming in the waters of the smaller waterfalls around its base that have a really dark color from all the tannins. It almost looks like iced tea. And just feeling one of those first moments of awe, just like absolute awe in contact with this water, in contact with something much greater than myself. Um, in those waters, it's so dark, but there were all of these suspended shimmering particles in it that if you dove just a few feet under, it felt like you were swimming amongst the stars. And like that moment of feeling so small but so perfectly placed in the whole of the universe stuck with me from the time of childhood. And I had similar experiences in my early 20s when I moved down to the Brazilian Amazon to do nonprofit work there. Similarly, the Amazon River and some of its major tributaries are enormous on a scale and so integrated with all of the life on the banks of the river too. That again, I just felt myself in the presence of something so much larger. And that connection with something divine through this contact with these really special watery places definitely fuels my motivation to stay engaged with the work, no matter what comes.
Mm. Amazing to hear about these early encounters with rivers, with waterfalls. I mean, just about a week ago, I had the chance to sit by a few waterfalls out in Oregon. I was out there visiting and speaking at one of the schools I work with the Marist community, and I was just it was so palpable to me how my stress level just dissipated as I sat by this waterfall. And I actually was compelled to read more about it afterwards, about the negative ions that are emitted from a waterfall and how they actually have a kind of somatic physiological impact on us. And I'm like, yeah, there must be some reason why I feel so much more at peace. And so I'm curious to hear, yeah, what can you say about the healing potentials of water?
Well,
Yeah.
that particular part about the negative ions and the physiological impacts of blue spaces is something that we've worked into Water Spirit's programming. It's easy to reach people and tell them, oh, we feel better when we're outside, right? But to give them the nuggets of why that happens to hold on to, why green spaces feel good, why blue spaces feel good, becomes something that makes it easier for them to carry with them or to give credence to. I have people come up to me whispering all the time, like, I just, I really love the water so much, or I really love hugging trees. I know it sounds woo woo, but I really do. I'm like, no, there's a reason for that. Your human body was made to feel good in these spaces. We share with people, for example, that after a seaside stroll, a person sleeps on average 47 minutes longer per night. There's something really about contact with blue spaces that relaxes us, that increases our sense of well-being by regulating our nervous system. So it's good for our physical and mental health.
Mm. It's amazing. And it makes me reflect on what we learned last month with Maddie Decker, who's here. Hi, Maddie. And was talking about these compounds emitted from trees. I think they're called phytonicides, I believe. Might be mispronouncing that slightly, but these compounds emitted by trees that help us to relax, right? And as the Japanese art of forest bathing teaches us. And so I'm just amazed by in some ways, science is discovering what we know intuitively about how the calming and restorative powers of forests, of the ocean, of waterfalls. And so perhaps pivoting to some of your work with Waterspirit, Blair, tell us a little bit more about the mission of your organization and some of these practices that you're helping to lead with diverse communities.
Well, I could talk about my work forever. Thankfully, I love what I get to do every day. Water Spirit was founded in 1998 by Sister Suzanne Golis. She is a sister of St. Joseph of Peace. And after a really important retreat where she delved into the worldview of Thomas Berry, she had the inspiration to start up Water Spirit, an eco-spiritual nonprofit where we could encourage people to deepen their awareness of the interconnectedness of humans with the natural world and with water specifically through both programs and through advocacy. And when Sister Suzanne retired in 2019, that's when I got to come on board. So our programmatic branch encourages people to deepen their awareness of water and their personal connection to it, both through things that look like environmental education, like you might see a lot of environmental nonprofits doing, especially around water. But we also have eco-spiritual programs, and that's where we do things like a weekly meditation for Earth, seasonal celebrations on the equinoxes and solstices. Both of those are hybrid. Then we do book clubs, we do mindfulness and nature walks. We've got a gratitude walk on the day after Thanksgiving coming up. And we also do a slate of programs now to help people with climate anxiety or experiencing other mental health impacts of the climate crisis, because the climate crisis is a water issue. And then our advocacy branch mostly focuses on issues in New Jersey, but largely they're grouped into buckets around water quality and access, stormwater management, where we do green infrastructure work as well, and climate change.
Mm. It's amazing how wide-ranging your organization is, both in creating spaces for eco-spiritual practice and then also putting that into praxis, right, through advocacy. So maybe we'll start with some of those practices. Take us through some of these exercises that you facilitate with groups. I mean, we just got a small taste of one at the beginning where I just was transported into this kind of cosmic sensibility, aligning with the hydrological cycles that flow in and through our bodies. But tell us more about, yeah, the kind of practices you lead with groups, perhaps both place-based practices and then also, helping people to deal with their climate anxiety.
Sure. So, well, Water Spirit has a 4-person staff. So thankfully, I get to do a lot of this with my program manager and with my public policy and justice organizer who takes care of our advocacy. But in addition to guided visualizations during our mindfulness and nature walks, like the ones you just got to experience, where you can clearly see the influence of Thomas Berry and Journey of the Universe and all of that good stuff in there, which is why I brought it in tonight. We also teach people what I like to call like back pocket regulation techniques. So we'll walk people through different kinds of breathing exercises that you can use in a moment where you might be feeling particularly activated, panicky, overwhelmed. So doing those exercises and then coupling that with direct contact with nature ups their potential, ups their effectiveness. We'll teach simple things like a pressure hug or a butterfly hug. So this is another technique for regulating the nervous system. In addition to including some of the more informational pieces that we've already covered about why being outside feels good and is good for us. That's a lot of what our outdoors programs for groups will look like. Sometimes we'll couple that with a beach cleanup or a waterway cleanup so that we get both the feeling and the service. And that kind of both and strategy, feeling and service or programs and advocacy does characterize what Water Spirit does. A small and mighty team, but it feels really important to me to cover all of that ground. I see it as part of something that I'm hoping is going to catch on, that I like to term regenerative activism. We need the direct contact with nature. We need to be continually improving our knowledge base, our awareness of what we should be doing now, best practices, doing the things that are within our control, and exercising our own agency. But there's also no way to be a perfect ecological saint or to personal responsibility yourself out of the climate crisis. So we need to join together with others to create and push for collective solutions. And that's where our advocacy branch comes in. That can also make us feel powerful, remembering that it's not all on our shoulders, that there is a community of people who care and who are working to make a difference. And the more that we do the collective work, the more that we open up the slate of personal possibilities for the people who might not be able to make all of the same choices in our day-to-day lives that we might be able to. And we can't just stay in the collective action because we need to come back to earth and renew, or else we run the risk of burning out. And so the part where we come back together and we do that internal work is where I see the climate anxiety work coming in. Climate anxiety, water anxiety, eco-anxiety, it's not just about anxiety, but that's the term that has a lot of awareness or cachet. So more accurately, we could term this slate of emotions that we feel when encountering environmental changes as climate distress. That kind of covers the spectrum from anxiety to grief to rage to everything else we could be experiencing. So I am of the opinion that taking time to work through the big feelings that engaging seriously with environmental activism can bring up is part of how we will continually reset our priorities to make sure we're really engaging in actions that are meaningful and sustainable to us and keep us from burning out. I myself have gone through a period of activist burnout. I don't want to ever experience that again, and I'm sick of losing good people. This is a long haul kind of movement, and we need to work in ways that will help us stay engaged. And I've seen people beginning their activist journeys or being on this path for decades, all still experiencing climate distress in some form or another. So by working in a slate of programs like support groups, we run one that's 10 weeks long, or standalone climate cafes, or by offering our Climate Pastoral Care Course online. These are programs that we've worked in to kind of bridge that gap between our programs and our advocacy and make sure that we're living together in this cycle of regenerative activism. We come into ourselves, we connect with Earth, we renew, we check in with ourselves, and then we go back out and take action together. And then we come back in, and then we spread back out.
I love this term you use, regenerative activism, right? Because I think when we care so deeply about social and ecological justice, we can so easily begin to kind of martyr ourselves to this cause without refilling our cup. I think about Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation, right? Coming together. Thich Nhat Hanh's engaged Buddhism, right? Zen practice meets engaged, engaged Buddhism. And without either one, we can either become embittered, right, as activists without a kind of spiritual grounding, or we run the risk of, as you're saying, burning out. And so I think it's amazing that within your organization, you're trying to hold both in creative equilibrium. I think Thomas Merton even writes about the activist burnout as all too salient as something, we can fall into if we don't continue to nurture our own meditation and prayer practices. So you mentioned a couple sort of levers of change. You talked about individual ecological conversion, and then you talked about the need for collective systemic change. I thought maybe we could address both of those things, right? You said that we shouldn't put all of the blame on ourselves to be ecological saints. And yet there are things that we can do individually to help safeguard water and be water custodians in our own bioregions. So starting at the individual level, like what are things that each of us can do to become better caretakers of water?
I love asking this question when we go out to community events, especially like high schools and so forth. I ask a bunch of people, okay, what can you do to save water? And everybody consistently tells me, take shorter showers, turn off the tap when you brush your teeth. Yes, these are great things that we absolutely should do to save water. But I also love telling people to look for the water that's invisible, because that's a great way to save water as well. So the things that might not be quite so obvious are every time you turn off your lights in your house, you're saving water. Generating electricity uses huge amounts of water to cool electric turbines. So by saving electricity, we're also saving water. And also reducing our plastics use. I say reducing because elimination would be excellent, but we live in systems that are, permeated by plastic. And even by turning on our taps, we nowadays would also be ingesting microplastics to some degree or another. So they're just kind of everywhere. So reduction as much as we can, one thing at a time in our own homes, is going to safeguard not only the waters inside of our own bodies, but also the waters out in the world, where those plastics eventually end up. And both of those, both the energy question and the plastics question, they have their roots in fossil fuels. So anything we can do to reduce our own fossil fuel consumption really is a major water action at this point in time. And linked to that, linked to electricity and fossil fuel use is also AI. This is something we're just starting to talk to people about. One of the major reasons that fossil fuel infrastructure is going to be built out, deepened in the US in the next few years is to support AI data centers. Huge amounts of fresh water are needed to cool those turbines as well, that then get evaporated and goes back to the sea. And it takes a very, very, very long time for that to become water that's fresh and usable for humans and our terrestrial friends again. So again, AI is kind of being forced onto the public at this point in time, often against our will. But turning off those tools or using them very judiciously is another way to save the water that you might not necessarily think of as water that you're saving because you're not immediately in contact with it. And reduction of consumer goods in general, particularly fashion. Fashion industry is very water heavy. So, using your clothes for as long as you can, thrifting clothes, trying to opt for clothes that have less plastic in them, or that a little bit more about how they were produced when possible. These are all great steps within our own control, or within our own, that our own habits can determine. And last one I'll throw out is also landscaping. Take a look at the plants around you. Lawns full of grass are water intensive more than like xeriscaping, which is more inspired by the desert, or using native plants. So there's a lot of great information out there about ways to make your yards more eco-friendly and wildlife friendly in the process of saving water. And then I want to just tack on to all of it immediately and then take all of this and expand it out. Plastics in your own home is great, but get together with other people to make the plastic producers pay, pass extended producer responsibility and other legislation to hit it at its core.
Yeah, thank you for reminding us of that need for both individual and systemic pressure. I did want to add on to what you mentioned, Blair, and I know this is something we've talked about, is reducing or eliminating, especially red meat consumption. I just looked up actually that a hamburger on average takes about 660 gallons to produce of fresh water, right? Hard to believe, but because of the energy conversion needed to produce a calorie of beef, you need 10 calories of feed for that cow, right? Because 90% of those calories are lost as the cow ingests the grass or corn or whatever it is. And so most people don't realize that invisible water usage that's attached to the things we eat.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's so funny. I've been vegetarian since 2003, vegan since 2005, and something about like being the vegan in the room, people tend to mistrust my opinion more. Like, oh, she's just being an activist about it. It's like, yes, that's my whole thing on various fronts. But it is true that reduction of red meat in particular is an excellent way to save water. I will add that, even though it doesn't outright kill the cow, but any, milk and cheese and other products that come from those animals that also require a lot of water to raise is also a way to reduce your water footprint. Basically, the lower down on the food chain that you can eat and the closer to plant-based that you can eat, the more you're saving water as well. And again, progress, not perfection. So, if you've skipped meat for this meal, that does something. Or if you've hosted an event and made it vegetarian or made it plant-based, that even if you don't do it like every day in your personal life, think about like who as a collective are you trying to be? So Water Spirits Gala for the past few years has been all plant-based, for example. And that's our default for most of our events too. I've started softening a little bit when some people really, really, really want dairy-based creamer for their coffee. I'm like, okay, I'll put it out just for you. But still, the lower down the food chain you can eat, the more you're saving water as well.
Thank you for that helpful reminder, Blair. And, recognizing that, these insights do call for lifestyle changes, right? And I think of the quote from Reinhold Niebuhr that the role of faith is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, right? So in some ways, like these insights, that a hamburger takes 660 gallons of water to produce, they disturb us, right? They disturb like what is often a mainstream way of eating, right? In this country, especially. And so pivoting to what you were saying about collective advocacy, Blair, I know you're about to head to the major international United Nations Convention on Climate Change in Brazil, where global leaders from around the world are coming together to address the unbridled emissions of greenhouse gases. We're fast on track to pass the 1.5 degrees warming threshold that was set at the Paris Accord back in 2015. And the US is running in the opposite direction and pretty much, saying climate change is a hoax and not even present at the table from a federal level. So, what are you experiencing and what are your hopes going into this major convention?
This is going to be my first climate COP, and it was a big decision to start going. So I've been doing this UN work since I started at Waterspirit 6 years ago, and I've mostly been accompanying the Ocean Conference and the Water Conference and the Biodiversity Conference. So you can see the water theme throughout. And I'd avoided actually going to the climate conferences because I had heard from my experienced colleagues that the space for civil society to really be an effective lever of change for that space has gotten intentionally narrowed and narrowed out by the fossil fuel lobbyists principally, as more and more spaces opened for them. So I been detecting a very strong cynicism amongst my very, very caring colleagues about what the member states are actually going to step up and commit themselves to, particularly the most dire polluters, including the US. But I made the choice to go down to COP30 in Brazil because of its location in Brazil. One, there is some hope that Lula and the very strong indigenous leadership in Brazil is actually going to inspire some real change. Two, they're launching a new kind of commitment that countries can make to protect, to reduce their carbon footprint through ocean-based actions. So I'm really curious to see how they're going to work in water and the ocean into these climate change commitments. But most of all, surrounding the COP process itself, the city that's hosting it is going to also be host to a major gathering of social movements from Brazil and from throughout Latin America and the world, but principally from Latin America. And that's what I'm really interested in tapping into. There have been social movements that I know of in Brazil, and thankfully from the 11 years I got to live there, that really have been making progress from the ground in chipping away at some of these capitalist optimist narratives that ultimately reproduce the extractive systems that are killing the planet. Like they're fighting back against big polluters. They're fighting back against big landowners, even in places where that work truly is a question of life and death. I mean, there are places in the Amazon that are Wild West, and and they are doing it. They're being successful. They're making headway, and I want to talk to them. I want to go down there in person. I want to learn their strategies. I want to learn what their frontline concerns are, especially around water and how Waterspirit can be an international support, and what kind of mutual exchange of strategies between our two communities and approaches might emerge from these conversations. As far as the member states and what they're going to commit to, once again, it's a toss-up. Maybe they'll be inspired to do something new and actually make commitments at COP30. Maybe not. Maybe we need something entirely new, that a new UN mechanism that will actually get countries to commit. And that's what the government of Colombia is actually trying to do. Next April, they're going to host the first major conference on the phase out of fossil fuels outside of the UN COP system. But I'm only just starting to learn about what Colombia's plans are there. For COP30, really, it's the grassroots and frontline communities that's most exciting me.
Mhm. I'm so glad you're bringing up the indigenous leadership from that region. We know that the Amazon rainforest has a quarter of the world's carbon, right? And so protecting that rainforest is so important for the biodiversity of the forest, for the people of the forest, and for the carbon that is sequestered in that ground. And we know from recent years that indigenous communities in Latin America have been at the front lines of granting rights to the Marañón River in Peru. I know the Machangara River in Ecuador was granted rights by a court in Ecuador in the last couple of years. And this was all due to indigenous leadership, right? Indigenous sensibilities that the river is a person, the river is a living body, and the river has um, agency in our and should have a role in our legal conversations. And so I'm really inspired by the way you're bridging together what are sometimes seen as separate conversations, right? People might talk about water over here and even have a separate oceans COP, and then talk about climate in a different vein. And they don't always look at that linkage. So yeah, we'll be curious to hear what you learned from that conference, Blair. I did want to also ask you about the other, on a more hopeful note, the High Seas Treaty that just about a month ago was passed by 60 nations to bring forth historic protections for the open oceans beginning next year. Can you tell us a little bit about that historic agreement and what it means for your work in water advocacy?
Yeah, the High Seas Treaty was a major step in the right direction. UN spaces can be very, very slow to decide something or to create real change. But the decades of work that led to the passage of the High Seas Treaty is being hailed as a major achievement. So basically, most of the ocean is international waters. And so an international treaty is the best way to govern those waters. And the High Seas Treaty creates a mechanism for creating and expanding marine protected areas. So areas of the ocean that are recognized as biodiversity hotspots that require special protections that would then be, defined and regulated by the UN itself. There were several steps that took a few years to actually getting the treaty to kick into action. And like Sam said, that milestone was just reached. 60 countries finally ratified it. So in mid-January, the treaty will officially become international law. And every year, a new conference will be taking place, a new COP process for the ocean will be taking place to touch base around how well the goals of the High Sea Treaty are being met. We're going to have a brand new COP conference for the ocean.
It's really exciting. And I think we need those hopeful stories to energize our spirits. And I had the chance to go to the UN Biodiversity Conference back in, I think it was 2020. 2002 in Montreal. And that was when these, I think, nearly 200 member states came together to chart a path to protecting 30% of the Earth's lands and waters by 2030, right? So this high seas treaty could be seen as a really important step forward to protecting, right, these wide swaths of the ocean, which we know are also at risk from the bleaching of coral reefs and ocean acidification, right? So I guess before we head into our breakout rooms, and I think I could pick your brain all night, Blair, what is giving you hope as you continue to do your really amazing work at Waterspirit, right? What sustains your spirit and keeps you going, right? Now, 6 years into this incredible advocacy role at Waterspirit.
I'm gonna parse the language. Those for me are two different questions. What's giving me hope and what's sustaining me? I like to, it's easier for me to access the work itself. I think about the courage it takes to step up every day. I think of how fortified I feel by being around a community of people who care so deeply and who are doing the work. And I know that if I get up every day and do my part, that makes it a little bit easier for everybody else to get up every day and do their part. And there are little wins that we get to celebrate. And there are moments of connection with nature that absolutely bowl me over and remind me that it's not just me. There are greater forces moving through the universe. And Earth herself is speaking to us and through us and teaching us what to do if only we can quiet the noise and listen. And so connecting with her, connecting with Sister Water, and letting them be my guide is what keeps me engaged with the work and sustains me day to day. Maybe one day I'll get to hope, but hope feels very much like it's waiting for a payout to me. Like, oh, I hope that outcome that I'm waiting for is actually going to come through. And if it doesn't, I'll be really disappointed. I don't know. I can't handle hope if it doesn't have a qualifier like active hope or complicated hope or dark hope or something together with it, saying we will keep going no matter the outcome, detached from the outcomes, but working because we know it's the right thing to do.
Mm, mm. Beautifully said, Blair. Acting because it's the right thing to do, right? Even if we see through, a cloud of unknowing, right? We don't know what the path ahead will look like, right? But we fight, we struggle for the world we wish to inhabit, right? The dream of the earth, as Thomas Berry would say. So with that, we're going to give folks a chance to reflect on all of the amazing insights that Blair has shared. We're going to go into small groups of about 3 people. And if you're not in a position to be able to turn on your camera and converse, you're welcome to just hang out in the main room. But we're going to just have a chance to reflect on what is coming alive for us from what Blair shared, right? What really stands out to us? What inspires us from what we've heard? And then maybe is there a question that we want to bring into our collective discussion, which we will do for about the last half hour of our conversation. So I'm going to ask our wonderful colleague Joy to work her magic and put us in our local little biomes.
I'll be glad to do that.
Thank you so much. We'll see you all in about 10 minutes. Folks are continuing to trickle in. Welcome back to those just joining us. I think we've got a couple rooms still returning. Folks are savoring the last drops of conversation. So a couple more seconds. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed your chance to get to know some of your fellow participants and to digest some of the remarkable insights that Blair shared. I couldn't resist during the break picking up a copy of this amazing recent book, Is a River Alive by Robert McFarlane. And I wanted to just read a short passage that might enter us into our second group discussion. Most of us, I think, once felt rivers to be alive. Young children are natural explorers of the vivid in its old sense, from the Latin vividus, meaning spirited, lively, full of life. Young children instinctively inhabit and respond to a teeming world of talkative trees, singing rivers, and thoughtful mountains. This is why in so much children's literature, from fairy tales to folk tales, across centuries and languages, a speaking, listening, convivial landscape is a given. The language of hydrological governance refers to rivers, streams, and lakes as water bodies. To the 40,000 recognized water bodies in England, Wales, and Scotland should be added another 65 million or so. For every human is, of course, a water body. Water flows in and through us. Running, we are rivers. Seated, we are pools. Our brains and hearts are three-quarters water. Our skin is two-thirds water. Even our bones are watery. We were swimmers before we were walkers, slow turning like breath divers in the dark flotation tank of the womb. So, a wonderful book for those who haven't yet read it. So, we'd love to open up the conversation now to the group to ask any questions or offer any thoughts that we might have for Blair. Blair, I may give you a chance to respond to some of the questions I see in the chat. I see a few from Craig, if you're able to see those. Um, if you might say anything about, I think he asks three questions here. Do you have any initial reactions, Blair?
So I'm realizing now that what I typed in the chat probably wasn't visible to everybody who came back from a breakout room. But the first question, how many of our environmental dysfunctions grow out of our lack of or inability to have reverence for nature? So many real solutions must address the questions of values and reverence first before any technological solution. And my response to that is that at this point in history, where we have had the technological solutions we need for so long, it's impossible not to realize that they haven't been implemented at scale due to a lack of will. And that lack of will emerges from a lack of real commitment to water honoring values. There's a famous quote by Gus Speth that talks about how the biggest environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. So that's how he names them. I think that's a useful framework. You know, the technology is there. And for many of us, the connection to nature is there, but on a broad scale, those who are wielding power are not making water honoring and moral decisions. And that's why people of faith need to speak out and speak with the language of values. You know, water protecting and climate change is not just about technology and data. It really is about morality. And then the second question in the chat is, how do other countries view us in terms of environment, carbon, and global warming? Any insights? Yeah, and my response to that is it's mortifying to be an American at the UN right now. I think in many cases, people are able to distinguish between governments and the people they're supposed to be representing. There's certainly still many American professionals, institutions, groups appearing at UN spaces, even when our federal representatives will not. But I mean, it's widespread to be understood that the US is the major polluter with the ability to pay, with the responsibility to pay for the problems they've created, and they're not doing it. So, the work that we do here at home is striking at the heart of empire and having a global impact. It's our responsibility to do so as much as we can.
Thank you so much, Blair. That's really poignant and relevant insight speaking to our historical moment. Does anybody else have a question or comment that they would like to raise? I see Maddie with her hand up. I think you're muted still.
Sorry, and I see Daniel's up too. I'll be brief. First of all, just want to say thank you so much, Blair, for your inspiring and educating talk. I just really want to learn more of the specifics. I love your words about look for the invisible water. I would love to reach out to you later and maybe we can email, and I'd love to do some writing about that. And there's so many things I was sharing in the breakout, how my teacher, John Kabat-Zinn, said recently, awareness is a game changer. And it is. And I've been having experiences of seeing things that change because of my sharing my awareness. But I'd love to support you in your work and to see how I might be able to do this. So thank you so much, and I'll be in touch with you.
And please do, Maddie. I've just put my email into the chat. That invitation to stay in touch is open to everybody. And if you don't want to send an email directly to me, you just want to know what's going on at Waterspirit, we do have a number of actions you can take online from wherever you are or programs you can zoom into. Please visit www.waterspirit.org and take a look around.
Thank you, Maddie. And I loved being able to chat with Maddie in our breakout room after she co-facilitated a forest bathing exercise with me at Mebkin back in September. And we had her as our honorary guest last month. So I'm so grateful to move from the forest to the ocean and to the rivers today. So wonderful. Daniel, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, thank you for a very interesting conversation. Both Sam and you, Blair, mentioned at the beginning, I was a chemist in a previous life. So you mentioned negative ions. Could you qualify a little bit what these negative ions are related to water?
We are now reaching beyond the limits of my knowledge without looking at my notes in front of me. I'll be candid with you. I will tell you that my source for that, there are a number of sources, but an easy one is the book Blue Mind, which gets into a little more deeply the physiological impacts of blue spaces on our human organisms. Sam, do you have anything to add to that? It sounds like your look into it might be a little fresher, top of mind.
I am admittedly just quickly looking up an NIH study now to look at the history of the effects of negative ions over the past 100 years and their effects on human beings. I'm not going to speak any further to them because I wonder if anybody in the community might know more about this particular effect.
Well, this relates to the health benefits that are so large and spending time in nature, but anyone going outside after a rain knows this, right? You breathe in and you feel it, or as you pointed out, being at the waterfall. So, I go with personal experience. How do you feel? And to a person, people will say, I feel better. But there are scientific things that we could learn and be able to speak to. And it's probably a good idea to be able to know that. I appreciate Daniel's question.
Sam, could you pop that study in the chat?
Yeah, I'm actually borrowing this from WebMD, that negative ions are odorless, tasteless, and invisible molecules that we inhale in abundance in certain environments. Think mountains, waterfalls, and beaches. Once they reach our bloodstream, negative ions are believed to produce biochemical reactions that increase levels of the mood chemical serotonin, helping to alleviate depression, relieve stress, and boost daytime energy. So I'll put that link in the chat. Thank you for the very thought-provoking question, Daniel. Kathleen.
Kathleen, you're muted.
I would just like to give Blair and the rest of you a little bit of hope. I don't know if this is a nationwide or worldwide movement yet, but there is a movement afoot to be mindful stewards of the planet in a place-based way. For the last 25 years, I've been involved with the Chicago Botanic Garden and other agencies doing natural areas stewardship. And right now I'm the mom of 2 sites, one of which has a beach. And I can attest to the healing powers of being out there at the beach, but also to the effects of being caring in a tangible way for the planet, for that site, removing invasive species, engaging with other people, teaching them about nature, teaching them the names of the plants. And while not everybody will have this opportunity, I know that I'm extremely fortunate. And there's thousands of people in the Chicago region who are involved in this. So I don't know how I'm not connected much further than that. It can be a thing, and it's really hopeful work, and it's very healing work. And so I just want to urge everybody here gathered to see if you can find out more about the possibilities of that where you are.
Kathleen.
Thank you, Kathleen. So inspiring to hear about your local stewardship, right? As we think globally, act locally in so many ways, right? I did just want to lift up as well Denise's remarkable advocacy work for decades for sea turtles. I learned a lot from her during our retreat at Mebkin in September, and very relevant to our conversation this evening. And not to put you on the spot, Denise, but I do wonder, is there anything that you're thinking about? And maybe can you just share briefly something from your own experience working with sea turtle conservation?
Well, I can agree with everybody about, being the place that has water, for me, the Atlantic Ocean. That itself has definite impact on you, and now that I'm learning, it increases the serotonins. But it really is hopeful to me about the work that you're talking about, the High Seas Treaty, because the biggest issues that we see with the loggerhead sea turtles really is pollution. We've managed here in South Carolina to eliminate the problems of adult mother turtles getting caught up in the shrimping trawls by having turtle excluding devices. And so now the biggest problem for the mother turtles is the plastics. Baby turtles, weeks old, have been x-rayed in the Sargasso Sea by the Department of Natural Resources, and there are already microplastics in their bodies. Where they're feeding from, they're estimating that they're half of what they're eating is plastics, microplastics. So I hope the High Seas Treaty will somehow help eliminate the plastics, or we get some of these young folks to use technology to help us do better cleaning our oceans. But the sea turtles have gone from endangered to just threatened. And so we're hopeful that that will continue to improve. And thank you for letting me share.
Thank you for giving us more context about the problem of plastics as well and how pervasive it is. I mean, it's the same bad actors blocking the real change in the climate COP spaces at the UN as at the plastic treaties, because it all comes back to fossil fuels and those lobbyists. So everything that we do to chip away at the fossil fuel industry and bring about a plastic-free and renewable energy future is walking hand in hand with all of our efforts to protect water.
Absolutely. Thank you for, making that linkage, which I think a lot of folks aren't necessarily aware of, Blair, is, that plastics are a fossil fuel byproduct. And just lifting up another really powerful new book from Bill McKibben, Here Comes the Sun, about the rapid expansion of renewable energy around the world, even in the face of some of these barriers that we're facing. So another just hopeful read and a really important read for those who might be interested. Judy, we'd love to hear from you, and then Father Garrick.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Blair, for giving us so many new pieces of information. I was wondering, I have two questions. The first is, will you be reporting on or speaking about the conference in Brazil when you get back? And the other is, what is a gratitude walk?
So I normally host some kind of webinar when I get back from a major UN conference. I don't yet have one on the calendar for after COP30, but I imagine it will happen sometime in mid-December. And I'd be happy to share more information about that, perhaps with Sam to spread to everybody who's on the mailing list. I'm delighted to. And then a gratitude walk is something that we started up about 4 years ago. There's a movement that we tapped into, which is #OptOnline. It's a movement to get people outside instead of in the stores on Black Friday. And so we thought, well, it's, after Thanksgiving, people have gratitude on the tips of their brains. So let's call this a gratitude walk. This year, actually, we're branding it a forest bathing and gratitude walk. So we go out to one of our local nature trails and do some of these general mindfulness exercises like I've gotten to talk you through today. We'll add a few poems and contemplations about gratitude and giving thanks for nature. And then depending on the exact spot that we pick year to year, sometimes we'll also do a little trail or beach cleanup at the end to express that gratitude through service.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judy, and thank you, Blair. I would love to be a participant in that walk at some point if the opportunity presented. I remember that there's a quote from Thomas Aquinas, I think it is, who says, gratitude is the root of religious experience, right? Like it all comes back to supreme gratitude in so many ways. So bringing that into our consciousness is such a powerful reminder. Father Garrick.
Yes, Blair, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the pastoral care course you offer.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. The Climate Pastoral Care Course is a 13-module online self-paced course that brings in the best knowledge emerging from the field of climate psychology about what climate distress is. That's that eco-anxiety, climate grief, etc. How it manifests in different ways in particular communities. So, for example, we have modules for parents and children. We have modules for climate scientists and activists. We have a module about race-conscious climate pastoral care, etc. And then it ends on modules that uses specific tools from Christian traditions to address some of these forms of climate distress or issues around climate change that might come up. For example, there's part of the course that talks about rituals of grief and lament. There's insights on scripture together with each of the modules. There's a talk about earth honoring versus earth harming theologies and how to deal with congregational conflict around climate change. And it all wraps up on a note about hope and agency. So that course, as I mentioned, is online and self-paced. It's got a nominal fee of 200 Australian dollars, which works out to about 150 US. That's available through Waterspirit's website. Additionally, I will add that our friends at an organization in Maine, the BTS Center, are using the Climate Pastoral Care course as the base text for their guided group that they call Navigating Climate Spiritual Care. And applications for their next cohort are due this Thursday. So if this sounds like the kind of course that might interest you, but you don't necessarily want to study it alone, you want to study it with people, doing it through the BTS Center is a great way to do that.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, such a wonderful offering, really speaking to the signs of our times, Blair. I once spoke with a psychologist who was shifting away from the word climate anxiety to climate distress, as you said, or eco distress, because she was basically saying that anxiety suggests that this is an individual's problem or there's something maybe wrong with them. But distress normalizes the experience, right? It's a normal emotion to feel in the midst of ecological changes. So I appreciated that distinction around eco distress and climate distress. And so wonderful that you're offering some inner resources to help us move through those emotions. Anybody else with a question or comment? Grace?
Yeah. Yes.
Hi, Grace.
Trying to raise my hand. I didn't know how to do that. Yeah, so hi. Thank you so much for this. I just you drawing so much to my awareness, just breathing out a liter of water. I mean, things like that. Just facts are helpful to keep in mind about how water is just so part of just everything, the light that's on right now, you know. I've just been just so frustrated, as many people are, maybe about AI and how much, and you've pointed to how much it's just depleting the environment to be in infiltrating our lives. And I would love to, I've almost tried to like not have AI, but it doesn't seem possible. I don't know if you have any kind of boycott or any kind of suggestions that in dealing with this massive new thing in our lives that is going to have huge environmental impacts is.
Yeah, it's, Waterspirit hasn't even published our one-page briefing that we've been wanting to do for a while about water and AI because everything is evolving so quickly. So the suggestions that I have for today feel very preliminary, and kind of feel like my suggestions around plastics and that, like, it's being forced on us. So we're going to go for harm reduction first. So you can do, for example, Google searches that don't return AI results. You type in whatever you want and you hit minus AI, and it'll show everything without that AI overview at the top.
Mm.
There are
Mhm.
certain pieces of software that you might have on your computer. I'm thinking of the Adobe suite right now, where you can turn off their AI tools. You can choose. Yeah, somebody posted in the chat where you can turn off AI settings in Zoom.
Okay.
Personally, I don't use AI to generate art or videos of any kind. I also have a husband who's an artist, and all AI art generators are trained upon real artists' actual work. So it's all
Yep.
stolen art. That one's less aquatic and more moral. Those are some things that we can do. And I wish that I could come up right here to say, here's a way to find out when a data center is being proposed for your community or your state, and here's how to get involved and fight back. There are a lot of bigger environmental organizations than Waterspirit who have broader networks of information, who I know are doing that kind of monitoring. I see we have somebody from Sierra Club on the call, for example. So making sure to connect with your larger organizations is a great way to make sure that when those instances come up, you're prepared. In New Jersey, at least, New Jersey, New York, I know they're trying to reactivate some nuclear sites like Indian Point, with the idea of eventually using that nuclear power to fuel AI, which is also all manner of water threatening and scary. So apart from the turning off your tools, making choices like writing your own emails, or actually paying artists for their work when you need it, etc. I would say stay connected with your environmental groups, including Waterspirit, and be ready to throw in your voice, call your reps, send your letters when those opportunities arise.
Okay. Thank you.
I will say this AI revolution has made me really appreciate a good old messy sentence. Like, I just taught a 6-week course for teenagers called Emerging Earth Leaders, a global training program for teens, as an introduction to the Earth Charter and the principles of ecology, justice, and peace. And I loved the experience of receiving student essays with just like clunky, regular old ninth grade sentences. Like it was so satisfying, you know, as a high school teacher myself, like, you know, a good old run-on sentence or a sentence fragment, something that felt human, you know?
Yeah, I see the utility. Like there are interesting use cases. Like I've, gone to the UN space and heard people talk about AI powered drones that are strategically seeding mangroves or that are deactivating landmines in Ukraine. Just like there are strategic uses for plastics too, like think about a hospital setting. But the point is it's too big, too much of a problem being pushed out in ways that we don't need it. We're in high school, we're teaching kids to write essays. Like if they use AI to cut that corner, what are we actually teaching them? You know, where's their voice and their craft and creativity and personality?
Right.
This is said as the mom of a ninth grader.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for that important nuance, Blair, right? Looking at all these issues with that nuance and critical perspective. I see a couple comments in the chat. Thank you, Daniel, for your comment about the relationship between water and fossil fuel derivatives. Yeah, and the average consumption of crude oil is 9 liters per capita, right? Do you mean that daily, Daniel? Is that that figure? I think you're muted, but I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say.
Yeah, it is daily. Yeah, sorry.
Daily. Yeah.
It's huge. Whether we drive an electric car or not, it just plastic mainly is everywhere, and it's all derived from crude oil. So we are consuming 2.5 gallons of crude oil per day per capita in North America, which is just totally insane.
Right. And so, how do we create incentives and how do we create cultures where it's easier to do good, right? And easier to live a clean lifestyle, right? Yeah, as Blair was saying earlier, it's largely a question of collective will and values, Any other thoughts or questions for Blair?
I see a question in the chat. When is the conference? Maddie, do you mean COP 30? I think, yes, COP 30?
Yes.
Okay. COP 30 will be taking place from November 10th to the 21st.
Yeah. And for those who aren't familiar, it's an annual conference of countries from around the world coming together to talk about the climate crisis and to continue benchmarking against previous goals set forth from earlier conventions, right? Like at 10 years ago at Paris, there was this my understanding was non-binding agreement to keep temperatures beneath 1.5 degrees Celsius warming since 1850 levels. That's about 3 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're fast pushing that threshold, right? So I think this 10-year threshold is critically important. And I also just wanted to lift up a webinar that's happening actually on Wednesday in advance of this conference, which is called Science and Spirituality, an Ethical Stocktake Dialogue to Inspire COP 30. So my teacher, Mary Evelyn Tucker, will be on there with Karenna Gore from the Executive Director for the Center for Earth Ethics, as well as Indigenous leader Lila June Johnston and Ursula Goodenough, who's a cell biologist, as well as Miriam Vilela from Earth Charter International to talk about really the intersection of science and spirituality in animating transformative change at that conference. So I just wanted to lift that up. Maybe I can put that in the chat as well for Wednesday afternoon.
That's another new initiative to come out of this COP30 process. Another thing that intrigues me about how Brazil is doing something different. They've created this formal process they're calling the Global Ethical Stocktake to really take a look at the faith and morals and values part of climate change that has largely been ignored in these big COP conferences. They created a way for groups around the world to contribute their voice as well, called self-organized dialogues. Waterspirit did one a couple weeks ago. And during COP30 itself, a lot of these answers to big questions like, what do our local traditions teach us about how to care for the earth? What gets in the way of people actually enacting these changes? The global community's collection of responses will be on display at COP30. And I'm interested to see what they do with more of that ethical focus of the COP conference.
I'm so glad you're mentioning that, Blair, because there's so much discussion about parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere or tenths of degree warming. And these are important conversations, right? But beneath those figures, we're talking about human lives, right? We're talking about more than human lives that are at risk. We just saw Hurricane Melissa ravage Jamaica, Cuba, and Haiti, right? So these are bringing in our sense of spirituality and the humanities into these conversations is so vital. Before we close, any comment to Craig's question in the chat, Blair, around a truly environmental sensitive lifestyle?
That could be another 3 hours of conversation, very but I will say, just based off of a conversation that you and I were having a couple weeks ago, Sam, I do think that truly aligning with Earth and having an environmentally sensitive lifestyle is going to require more of us than perhaps we might initially get comfortable with, because the unknown generally feels very uncomfortable. I think there are a lot of people who are doing whatever it takes to feel like business as usual, or like the world that they know is going to be able to continue forever, with some like minor little tweaks here and there. But I think Earth is actually requesting something far greater from us at this time. But the good news is that's not a question of deprivation. I think ultimately it can come from joy and from love. Like ultimately, if we're living aligned with our values and aligned with Earth, isn't that a joyful thing?
Beautiful. And I will say I went to a conference on Friday and Saturday called Environmental Joy. And this was the annual Environmental Justice Conference at Yale. Remarkable gathering, right? That this work should be joyful, right? And not only about sacrifice or giving things up, right? But the joy of being alive together. Barbara, do you have maybe a quick comment before we close?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I felt challenged, and I'm going to think about it more. Your definition of hope, because that's something that I struggle with a lot. But I want you to know that your work and your will, not your outcome, but your will and commitment gives me a great deal of hope. So thank you very much.
Hear, hear.
Thank you so much, Barbara. We echo that. And Blair, any parting words before we offer our deep gratitude and send you off into your blissful night?
Sure. One more that I really wanted to say and forgot to is just that doing water work is so critically important, but water is so easy to take for granted. So the more that we can build little rituals into our life that remind us how special and sacred that water is, the better. So even if, the first time you're going to grab your water bottle at your desk, you take a moment to be with the water, to say a prayer or intention, to take a tiny little moment to re-enchant and make it special again. That'll go a long way toward the kind of aquatic conversion that we all need in order to do this work at scale. So thank you again, everybody, for the opportunity. Love getting a chance to share more about my work and things that are close to my heart. And very sincerely once again repeat the invitation to stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Blair, for your wise presence and gracious sharing tonight. Thank you to everyone for being here this evening. Next month, I will be actually traveling at the Economy of Francesco conference during our Zoom. So we are planning to be on hiatus next month until January. Father Garrett can perhaps speak more to that. Until January 5th, Monday, will be our next Mebkin gathering. Father Garrick, anything else from you?
Not right now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you all for all of your presence and engagement this year, whether you're new or returning. Such a blessing to share in this space with you all. Be well and many blessings on your ongoing great work. Yep. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.